The stats reveal it as well. We've got very few people under the age of 30 as licensed customs brokers, not many more between 30 and 40. It's an ageing industry. And unless they all work through to their 70s and 80s and beyond, we're going to have a big gap very soon.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Back and Forth podcast. Today marks a very special milestone for us because we just achieved 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So to all of you viewers and subscribers, thank you very much. 1,000 subscribers is probably a very small milestone, but for us it is very important because, you know, logistics is not a very easy industry to talk about. And let's face it, you know, who wants to listen to anything about logistics? So for all of you freight nerds out there, thank you for subscribing, and we hope more can come onto our channel. Today, our guest is a very special one. The reason why I say that, his name is Paul Zalai. He's from FTA. And for some of you who's been watching us for some time, you'll remember him as our very first VIP guest. The reason why we had him on as our first episode was because of his advocacy work. He was someone that, you know, I personally observed for a very long time, who was doing more than any other industry body in advocating for our industry, for the people within it, from the truckers to the terminals to the forwarders. And, you know, he was putting us full frontal with the ministers, for all of the bureaucrats out there that are relevant to our industry. So today, what better guest to have back than Paul Zalai from FTA to celebrate our 1,000 subscriber episode. So welcome, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, I really appreciate being back, and congratulations to you and the team for what you're doing here with these clips. It's really very impressive.
Yeah. The reason why we have asked you the first time to come onto our show was because of your advocacy work. You know, it's very similar to what we're trying to do. We're trying to shine a spotlight, but you're doing it in a very robust way because you're doing it in the backgrounds, you know, reaching out to all the ministers and various industry bodies, understanding, talking on the front lines. And one of my biggest criticism of our industry was that because we're all so busy and there are so many of us, you know, in the game, we also got our blinkers on, focusing on our own little sort of playground. We know we never had an industry body that was robust enough doing what you do. And I think, you know, through your growing membership as well, where are we up to today?
Oh, we've got over 500 members.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. That speaks volume for the work because, you know, prior to you coming on, there were a few around, as you know. I respect all of them for what they do, but no one was able to achieve the access that you have been doing. So congratulations, and again, we're very honoured to have you back for this episode.
Yeah, no, thanks. So look, it's great to be here, and again, it is a great opportunity for us to showcase some of those developments. So, yeah, hopefully the 1,000 subscribers are all tuning into this, and we'll get something out of it.
Exactly. Well, since our first episode, I think we would have been a year into the pandemic.
Yeah.
People were generally still either getting into lockdown or coming out of lockdown, right? Things were still rather uncertain. How much things have changed over the course of the last year and a half since you've been on, I believe. And I've seen you on LinkedIn talking about very important subjects. One of the most important ones that I've actually were talking off camera about was this terminal charges that's relating to all the infrastructure and what have you, and that's having real world impact on the main street. It's being felt by the truckers, it's being felt by our customers, by us and so forth. Tell us more.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. There's been a new model that the stevedores have adopted over a few years now. They started off on their vehicle booking systems, putting a few dollars charge on the system, initially to cover some of their IT costs to run those systems. But they very quickly discovered it's a very effective way for them to do their cost recovery, to pay their bills. The shipping lines have been in a very strong position where they put the squeeze on their suppliers, including the stevedores. They seem to be very much encouraging the stevedores to, rather than charge them for the service, to recover the fees off the land side, off the road and rail operators. So what started off as a few dollars is now, you know, getting closer to $150, $200 every time you need access to the terminal. It doesn't end there. The empty container parks have picked up on the same model. So again, they've got vehicle booking systems, which is good. You know, we're all for it. It gives ordered ways for trucks to enter and leave terminals and empty container parks. But they've also been using it as a cost recovery mechanism. So The empty container parks are quickly catching up to the stevedores now and charging fees. And again, a transport operator or yourself as a forwarder has no ability to influence the price or service. You're purely a price taker. And, we're basically been calling it a ransom model. You've got to pay the money to get access.
Just listening to you speaking now, because the obvious questions I have, and I'm sure the viewers will have, will be like, well, this is a private entity. So therefore, you can't really control what a private entity can and can't do. That's a private enterprise. But they are operating on infrastructure, which, like you correctly identified, our customers and ourselves and our truckers have no other options but to utilize it. So it's like dealing with a privatized government. What gives?
Again, look, it's important that everyone in the supply chain is profitable. They can make money, let alone recover their costs. But everyone, whether it's your business, my business, or your listeners, whether their costs are going up because of rent, because of bringing in new infrastructure, because of labour costs, whatever, any other business would have to either absorb that cost or pass it on to their commercial client. The stevedores are in a different position. They've got all these costs and we acknowledge it, and a lot of their infrastructure costs are great and will deliver efficiencies. But our position has been that they should not charge the landside operators. They should either absorb those costs and any efficiencies they achieve, or pass it on to their commercial client, the shipping line.
Right.
If the shipping line is then in a position where they can't absorb that, then they pass it on to you as a freight forwarder or direct to an importer or an exporter in negotiated fees.
Right.
So we're not looking for government intervention to control pricing. We're looking for government intervention to get the cost recovery model right, where the entities are dealing with their commercial partner to pass on costs.
But then I think without data, right, the terminal operators, the first response will be, well, our costs are rising. And let's be fair to everyone, everyone's costs are rising, right, due to the current inflationary pressures and so forth. Are there any checks and balances in place?
Look, not really. I'll be talking to the Victorian Minister for Ports after this. They at least had an attempt. So they tried to put together a voluntary arrangement where the stevedores would only do an increase once per year, and they would have to give a certain period of notice, and industry would have an opportunity to come back and try and negotiate. We were quite cynical about it, and we said from the very beginning, it's not going to work. So talking to the Victorian Minister at the time, we said, look, we'll give it a go. So when each of the stevedores there, whether it was DP World, Patrick's or VICT, each time they went to introduce an increased charge, we went through the process. We wrote to them, we met with them, we had polite conversations, but ultimately they never gave us the detail that we were after. And I never realistically expected that they would open up their books
because it's private entity.
To give us a forensic check of that. We knew it wouldn't work, but we went through the process and it doesn't work. What happened from then is the Productivity Commission was put in place to do a review of Australia's maritime logistics system last year. And they did a very good job. They put together a very good report. Draft report came out late last year, and they basically picked up on our recommendation verbatim, saying that there should be some regulation in place, not to affect pricing, but that the cost should not go back on the transport operator, back to the shipping line. And we thought, fantastic. They then engaged with industry further. I'm sure the stevedores spoke to them. I'm sure the shipping lines spoke to them. And by the time they came out with the final report, which was released in January this year, that recommendation had been watered down. But still not a bad position.
Right.
So what they said is that there should be new regulation put in place, administered by the ACCC, and that the stevedores, similar to what the Victorian model was, have an opportunity once a year to adjust their fees.
Right.
But rather than dealing with industry who, they were never going to open their books to us to verify it, they would have to satisfy the ACCC on the legitimacy of that increase. If the ACCC weren't happy with it, then the stevedores would not be allowed to increase the fee and would not have a second bite of the cherry until that same time the following year. So it would put pressure on the stevedores to say, okay, if we're going to increase it, we need to justify it to the regulator, otherwise we get no increase. I still think it's convoluted and complex, but it's better than what we've got today.
The obvious question for me would be like, you are right, when things are convoluted, it's very hard to implement, let alone police, if we can even use the word police here, very sensitively.
Yeah.
It is a start.
Yeah.
What does this conversation look like going forward?
Well, look, the ball's in the court now of the federal government. So, look, disappointingly, they had that report and it was published in January this year. At that time, they were still a relatively new government. They had a lot to deal with, as we said, recovering still from the pandemic and everything that flowed on from there, inflationary pressures, all the rest of it. So they've had a lot on their plate. But from where we're sitting now, their honeymoon is over. And we really do need to see some action. So we've been engaging mainly through the Treasurer's Office because the Productivity Commission works through the Treasurer. We're going to see some developments come out soon around shipping competition, which I think we might have talked about on the last video. We're urging the federal government, because it's an opportunity for the federal government to come out with a good news story. They're under pressure with inflationary pressures.
That's right.
Meanwhile, we've got these costs which pass on down the supply chain, down to retailers, through to consumers. There's an opportunity here for the federal government to have a good news story and show that they're listening and that they're doing something, rather than us try to embarrass them to act.
Yeah, get on the front foot, because I think we can follow that rabbit down a very deep hole when we talk about that type of thing. But I definitely agree with you. If we walk into our customer's warehouse today, right, and I'm sure this is a common problem with all of our colleagues in our industry, you'll find a lot of those warehouses are fully stocked. Not only are they fully stocked, they're fully stocked with COVID goods. That in preparation, anticipation of COVID demands, which is no longer here. It's gone. It's finished. It's vanished like a genie. The problem what you have on the street level is that you've got these importers who's brought in a lot of stock, preparing for demand that's no longer there, paid premiums in shipping line costs. Premiums, historical premiums to get that stock. So that stock maybe would have cost $5 normally pre-COVID. Now it's costing $20 per unit, right? For argument's sake. Not only are they overstocked, they're overstocked with expensive stock. They have to get rid of that. And a lot of our small businesses, their money are tied into there. So either they liquidate, go bankrupt, or they have to sell it somehow. Okay, some of them will needing to start to take a hit on those margins. So which means that a small, medium-sized business environment is one that even if that company is selling their goods, they're either taking a hit on it or they're not making hardly any margin on it just to get rid of the stock. Because a lot of these stocks, a lot of the consumer goods are transient, It's not like you buy this year and it's valid for the next 10 years. It's not. It's highly seasonal. So this is the challenge. And then meanwhile, those are the retail pressures. And then you've got the supply pressures, like for example, like I said earlier when we were off camera, to have a container delivered anywhere in Sydney these days, by the time you add up all the surcharges and so forth and what have you, it's $1,000. So every time I see a container on the street, it's $1,000, which is only a few years ago was 600. And I'm taking a bit of liberties in generalizing here, but those are pretty accurate average figures. Me as a freight forwarder, being in the middle of it all, looking at all of these at play, costs rising from the terminals and ports, the trucker costs are going high. I've got clients that's not making money, losing money to get rid of their stock. Some are actually closing doors, right? And meanwhile, we still have this sticky inflation going on because of the cost rising from the supply side. It's an environment where I'm really scratching my head and goes, well, what's going to happen next year or 2025? It paints a very bleak picture. And so, again, I think, I'm not one for regulation because I'm all for privatization, all that's got sort of good stuff. But when you're dealing with ports and infrastructure, you are so accurate in saying that we have no other choice but to use these terminals. And they can raise their rates, fine, justify it. But then again, they're private. They don't need to justify anything to anyone. They can just pull a number out of their rear end and say, this is the number. And everybody has to pay it. So you are right. The government needs to get on the front foot.
Yeah, and look, there definitely needs more scrutiny over it. And then you talk about the transport sector as well. You know, they have to pay these fees up front to get access.
Or they can't get their container, or we can't get our containers.
Most, I would imagine, are putting a margin on that as well because they've got cash flow and extra administration. So these fees that are already high, by the time they cascade down the supply chain to the importer or to the exporter, they're further inflated again.
Yep.
And it's not a criticism of the transport operator. They have to do it, otherwise they're going to be out of business. But the raw costs that we quote is only at the tip of the iceberg.
That's right, because it translates to so much more. It's by the time it gets down to the end consumer or the buyer, you're probably another 30%.
Look, the other thing to add in the mix of all of this too is a favourite topic, and if there are any other forwarders listening to this, container detention fees. You know, again, it's not as bad now because the congestion isn't as what it was during the pandemic, but the shipping lines handled the container flows very badly during the pandemic. We had too many containers in the country. The empty container parks were at capacity. There were redirections. Transport operators had to store containers in their yards and then had them double, triple stacked, and all the inefficiencies there. And meanwhile, the shipping lines basically had most of the shipping lines had the hide to charge container detention fees as well for the delayed return of those containers. Now, things have settled down now, but we're still experiencing it in circumstances where there's delays out of the control of the forwarder or the importer, you know, whether it's a biosecurity intervention or a customs intervention. The shipping line doesn't care. They will impose the container detention fees. So we've extrapolated all of this out, given a lot of information to the federal government, and conservatively, we're talking about over $1 billion a year in these terminal access charges and container detention charges alone, let alone everything else that's associated with moving trade.
And we're only talking two silos of fees, right? And as an industry, we've been very poor in being professional by way of how we charge our customers. And this is one of my own personal gripes with the industry, is this, laundry list of fees. Where does the laundry list of fees comes from? It comes from a systemic habit and laziness of just going, here's cost, add margin, pass it on. Here's cost, add margin, pass it on. Before you know it, you've got 20, 30 lines of costs. And then we pass that on to the end user and expect them to somehow miraculously understand what the hell we're talking about, and then somehow to reconcile it, and then somehow to build into the product cost and to work out. It's impossible. It's impossible. So when you earlier said, okay, the terminals need to absorb those higher costs, or the shipping lines need to absorb the higher costs instead of just passing it on, I agree with you, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Look, I haven't got a problem with the shipping lines passing it on.
Yeah.
But then, at least with the shipping line, you've got the opportunity to negotiate. Now, it depends on the environment at the time. During the pandemic, you had no choice.
Yes.
Because you couldn't negotiate. You just had to take whatever you could to get space on freight.
That's right.
Well, things are changing a little bit now. The shipping line sales teams are out knocking on doors again and looking for business. There is more of an opportunity to negotiate, and that's what commerce is all about. As you said before, we don't necessarily want regulation.
Yes.
We want commerce to do what it does and negotiate and do business.
Competition. We need some competition, but
Exactly.
But when it comes to terminals, then we have none.
And that's where again we do believe there is some need for government intervention. And again, the Productivity Commission did a sensational job, not just in terms of this recommendation, but other aspects of their report. And to be honest, it was refreshing, because when the last federal government put it to the Productivity Commission, I thought, oh, here we go. They're just sort of putting it to a side and they don't really want to take this too seriously. Well, to the credit of the Productivity Commission, they really listened to industry, wrote a very strong independent report. Right. We now need this current federal government to respond to it in some way, shape or form. So that's where we're at with that.
Okay. Well, good luck with that, because this is something that is a massive challenge for us as a freight forwarder, because we're getting a lot of pushbacks from our customers.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of pushback from our overseas agents who simply do not understand why Australian local transport is so expensive. Historically speaking, Australian domestic transport has always been one of the most expensive countries to deliver anything. With all of these additional surcharges, with the terminals we're having, we've just blown out, so a lot of my agents keeps on coming back to me and saying, "La, why are you increasing your rates so much?" And it's like,
No.
my margins are exactly the same, if not lower today than it was during COVID, much, much lower, but my costs to the end user are much higher.
Yeah.
And they just do not understand this.
Yeah.
And hopefully through conversations such as this, they're able to get a snippet in terms of the pressures that we go through in the industry. Yeah. So there's quite a few other things that you've been doing lately, Paul. And one of the things that I think you also posted on your LinkedIn was the border force controlling how they deal with the cargo at the border and so forth.
Yeah.
I think the ABF looking to revamp how they treat cargo and so forth. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
The ABF Commissioner, Michael Outram, who's a terrific operator and very honest, he gave a presentation recently to a Trans-Tasman group of industry representatives, and basically admitted that although the Australian Border Force is doing a good job and making a lot of seizures, whether it's illegal tobacco or drugs or whatever, they're only scratching the surface. Mm-hmm. And they know that now, because one of the things that came out of COVID was the testing of the sewerage systems. They can pick up what's happening in our environment.
Yeah.
They're only detecting about 25% of the narcotics that are coming into the country.
They think they're detecting 25%.
Yeah.
I think they're probably detecting a lot less than that.
Well, possibly, but they're getting huge volumes.
Yeah.
So whatever the percentage is, they're acknowledging really for the first time that they're missing a lot. I suppose the Australian Border Force is maybe using that as a lever to go back to their masters, the government, to get more funds as well. So they're looking at what they can do better. Yes. They've got a limitation in that they're basically hamstrung by the integrated cargo system, which is now about 18 years old, and wasn't great in the first place.
No.
And some of their technology is getting dated too, like the X-ray facilities that they had. They're probably getting close to about 20 years old, and 20 years ago it was probably the best solution that was out there. Yes. But now there's opportunities to do things better again. So they're looking to do more and more scanning or X-raying actually at terminal facilities, rather than taking containers away, bringing them back, all the rest of it. And same with air cargo as well. Air cargo is a challenge again, particularly here in Sydney, because Sydney Airport's got a limited footprint. But potentially they're looking to do some pretty innovative things out at the new Western Sydney Airport, where it's a greenfield site and gives them opportunities to work with the airport to do things
This
smarter.
is the one at Badger's Creek.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
So they're doing a lot there. Big issues that they have at the moment is the reference to what they call piggyback shipments. So reputable companies, their names are being used illegally to bring in illegal tobacco, drugs and the like. At the moment, a lot of the forwarders pay the duty and the GST on behalf of the importer. And what we're suggesting is perhaps a very simple initial step would be to say to those importers they have to pay direct. That way the Australian Border Force would get direct payment details and get a higher level of comfort that they're actually dealing with that actual importer.
As you was just saying that, it's never occurred to me of what you just said to be so common sense measure to apply.
Yeah.
Why a private entity such as our business, a freight forwarder, who's there to provide a service, not to collect revenue on behalf of the government, right? Pay on their behalf. Why we're involved in the first place is bewildering, to say the least. And this is why our industry has been plagued by certain type of customer expecting credit on these duties and GST payments, right? Which has nothing to do with us freight forwarders. What you just said there, as you said it, I was like, why? Why are they not making that a reality?
Yeah.
Because I said the win-win situation. You will then weed out a lot of the dodgy business.
Yeah.
And two, it takes the burden of the freight forwarder, which, let's face it, a freight forwarder's margin hovers around about 10%.
Look, a lot of our members have said to us over many years that, geez, why can't you lobby the government to mandate that importers pay direct? Because from a freight forward perspective. And I said, well, why would the federal government mandate that? They give the choice now. A freight forwarder can pay on behalf of the importer, or the freight forwarder can say to their client importer, you have to pay direct, we'll do your clearances. So we're taking this opportunity now with this threat to community protection to achieve two things. One is to give the Australian Border Force a level of comfort that they're dealing with the importer they think they are.
Yes.
But the other byproduct of that would be potentially a lot of the freight forwarders will be relieved of that headache of the cash flow issue of paying this out on behalf of their customers. And it's a big issue.
Yes.
Again, many years ago, we looked at this and we engaged with some trade credit insurance providers to try and safeguard our members in this space. But the trade credit insurance premiums were very high,
yes,
very complicated, and
yes,
it just didn't work.
That's right.
So I went to a lot of our other members and go, how do you deal with this risk? And a lot of them said, well, we drink heavily. So not necessarily sure that's a great solution, but that's what a lot of the industry...
It's a solution that usually works. I always say, Paul, never trust a freight forwarder who doesn't drink, because that freight forwarder isn't working hard enough.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So getting back onto the government wanting to spend more at the border in terms of revamping the X-ray machines and all that sounds like great things to me, because that sounds like government reinvesting into infrastructure, and therefore it's good for the country because it pushes forward and advances Australia. Are they working with the same budget? Do we know that information? How much budget they're working with, or
Look, they're going to need more money. Ever since the late 1990s, the Australian Border Force has had a cost recovery regime. So every time you do an import declaration now, fees go to the Department of Agriculture, fees go to the Australian Border Force, and it covers a lot of their operating costs.
Yes.
But that's a flat fee. So whether you're a major retailer importer, you're going to pay that on your import declaration, whether that covers 30 containers. If you're a small-time person who's bought back a statue from your trip overseas and it's over the value of $1,000, you're going to pay that same cost recovery fee.
Yes.
What we're saying is we understand cost recovery fees are here, they'll probably increase, but we need to revamp it and needs a fairer arrangement. And particularly those service providers and also those importers themselves that have demonstrated that they're low risk and have gone to great lengths to achieve that, they should get a differential cost recovery fee, because the government's largely taking them out of their haystack. And those that are high risk perhaps should be paying a higher fee.
100%. Again, this is another one of those things that, as you were talking, I'm saying, I'm 100% behind this drive, right? It's just like, again, the smaller guys paying for the bigger guy.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing we see, systemic issue across our community and society, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are right. Why should the one guy bring the one statue from Bali pay the same fee as a multinational who brings in 50 containers worth God knows how much money, and it's the same fee?
Yeah. Look, and again, you could argue it either way. You could say, well, that big retailer, they've done their risk assessment, and they're low risk. The statue coming from Bali might be full of drugs. But what we're saying is, I think the cost recovery should be associated with a whole range of things. The scale of operation, but also on the risk. So if an entity can demonstrate that they're low risk and that they've got measures in place, whether that's biosecurity, again, there's opportunities there in the biosecurity space. The department's teasing this idea of a green lane process. So if an importer can demonstrate that their whole supply chain, they've taken all these measures, they can get perhaps a facilitated outcome at import. We're saying that's great, but they should also receive a differential cost recovery. If they're going to the time, effort and cost to safeguard our borders, they should be incentivised and rewarded for that.
So this is like the springboarding into like the Australian Trusted Trader Scheme, for example. That's a perfect idyllic example or a platform where you can further make that elaborate by way of different tiers, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, you're right. If you do the extra work, then you should be incentivized for it.
Yeah.
And then it should be, I mean, that's orderly for me. I mean,
Yeah.
that sounds like an orderly solution, and that's a reasonably explainable solution to all users. And saying, you want to pay that, do that.
Well, essentially businesses want to do the right thing, but I think those that, trusted trader and other that should be recognised and rewarded with a tangible outcome as well.
Yes, well, we're very proud of our trusted trader status because, we did go through the rigmarole of filling out the forms, having the officers here, scanning through our SOPs, talking about the importance of border security, even our hiring process, right? We were super high on board with all of that because we believe, one, it helped us understand better of our own responsibilities. It sort of switched on lights in areas where previously was rather a little dim. But generally speaking, we felt that whole process enriched our business and made us more robust. And we were confident, of what we were doing as a member of the community. And also made us feel quite good on some of the areas we were doing great in, right? So there were a lot of good identifiable areas of improvement and so forth. We're happy to go through that process. And even now, it's not one of those set and forget things because they keep on coming back. They keep track of all your, things and saying, please explain here and so forth and what have you. So, for us as one of the good businesses out there that wants to do the right thing, it's an absolutely positive drive that I felt the government have launched in recent years.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that too. We are very supportive of the Trusted Trader program, but we want it to go to higher levels again. So again, we've had a lot of members saying to us, Paul, we're a very professional organisation. Why don't you go down the path and start up like a chartered practicing accountant type banner where you regulate that there's enough rigour there in the organisation, then you give them like a chartered practicing accountant badge. I go, I would love to, but I haven't got the budget of the CPA to do marketing in mainstream media and everything. They do a sensational job for their members in achieving that. But where I do see the opportunity is through the Australian Trusted Trader. They could be the CPA equivalent. But to do so, we've got to ensure that there is that sufficient rigour in their process, not that every man and his dog, excuse the pun, but your dog's here somewhere, that can get that accreditation. It needs to mean something, and it needs to differentiate the truly professional organisation. And I think that message is getting through to the Australian Border Force, and we would encourage them to increase their marketing of the Australian Trusted Trader too, into mainstream media, and really get it out there so that people would respect the tick that you've got and other companies have got for achieving those outcomes.
Well, let's open up the platform. Would you be open, say, if we both jointly engage with the ABF who runs the Australian Trusted Program and say, look, let's have an open forum where we promote the program on our podcast?
I think that's a terrific idea.
Why not? Because I agree with you. What you said earlier can address so many issues that we face as an industry. A lot of our issues that we face in the industry comes from the unregulated nature of it. Right? There are so many fly-by-nights and people calling their service for whatever they want to call their service at. Fees are all over the shop. It's a myriad of confusion and chaos through be it driven by your body or in conjunction with an Australian Trusted Trader backing. That gives us it gives the process some formality. And then some recognition, and then we can standardize things. Our industry needs standardization. A CPA can do what they do easily because the profession is standardized based on a set of value. You can't venture out of that. Our industry isn't that. So to get from there to here is through what you just said. Having that accreditation, recognition, formalize the process, standardize the industry so that we all start practicing and some of us elevate to a level, others are already there, great, good for you, and then play on that same playing field. Then our people who uses us or engages with us can have the confidence Because right now, a lot of our customers and the doors we knock on, the biggest challenge is risk. They see any freight forward or logistics is risk.
Yeah.
They don't see us as a profession. They see us as a risk.
Yeah.
And this is why selling is so difficult in our sector.
Yeah.
So again, I'm very high on it. So maybe we can collaborate.
Yeah, sure. Look, I can't speak on behalf of the Australian Border Force,
Yes.
but I know that they are looking to ramp up the trusted trader, and there's reference to Australian Trusted Trader 2.0. So it'd be interesting to see what that actually looks like. But yeah, look, if we could get a senior representative, or perhaps even the commissioner himself, and we might have to give him a copy of this recording, and we extend that invitation. But that would be a great opportunity.
I think so. Absolutely, 100%. Super high on that. Recently, you guys have gained some recognition. Is the ENSCO?
Oh yes.
I've read this a couple of times, and I still can't wrap my head around what is it and what it is that you guys have been accredited with.
Yeah, look, we haven't been accredited as such, but what we have been able to achieve through the Australian Bureau of Statistics is to actually get our sector recognised. So now, freight forwarders and customs brokers are actually recognised in the legislation.
You mean we weren't before?
No, we were just under general logistics clerks. That in itself might not seem too much, but what the opportunity is potentially to lead to more recognition from government, potentially even for funding as well. One of the big issues that we have is trying to get, it's a competitive labour market at the moment, is to try and get people into our industry. We've spoken with a couple of the different private organisations that do the apprenticeships. They come with great reputations, but again, their big issue is just attracting people to the industry. So this is a stepping stone towards potentially getting some government funding to perhaps, again, promote our industry through mainstream media and the like, because we've got the data, and look, customs brokers is a classic one. The ageing population, we know it. I've just got to look at our events and they're all bald and grey heads in the audience. But no offence to our membership. I can say that because of the way that I look. But the stats reveal it as well. We've got very few people under the age of 30 as licensed customs brokers, not many more between 30 and 40. It's an ageing industry. And unless they all work through to their 70s and 80s and beyond, we're going to have a big gap very soon. That's just one slice of the market. It's the same if you're looking at depot operations. It's the same if you're looking at truck drivers. It's the same throughout the board. So we've got a huge challenge on how to make the industry sexy. And even what you're doing now with this, it's so impressive to see that you've got a marketing team and you've got equipment it's not just promoting your business, but it's promoting the industry. And I think things like this are fantastic, but we need to be able to scale it up on a much bigger level again.
Absolutely.
So at least as a starting point of getting our profession recognised, it gives us half a chance to do other things.
Yeah, well, this is why we appreciate you a lot, and I personally appreciate you a lot. Getting our identity recognised by the ABS, which I thought we were. I had no idea that we weren't. It comes as such a shock. Yeah. And it's rather quite insulting, to be honest, right? Yeah. But so for you to have accomplished that, and we thank you. Yeah. Speaking on behalf of all my competitors and freight forwarding, logistics, thank you very much for doing that. Yeah,
and look, we're in a fortunate position now because we've got the growing membership. We've been able to bring on more resources. We've got a young lady who's based in Canberra now who was driving all of this and achieved a great result. But again, you're thanking us, but we're thanking you and and our growing membership for supporting us to give us an opportunity to do what we do. It's necessary because we can tackle little problems with band-aids here, band-aids there, but if you don't solve the main disease, we'll be forever unrecognised. Yeah. And this is why we do what we do. This platform isn't to sell TGL. Mm-hmm. It's really to bring experts or advocates such as yourself who make a difference in a very holistic, meaningful way for our industry. And this is, and we're very high on this, So again, thank you for always giving us the time. Yeah, no, not a problem at all. Yeah. Another one we would like to cover on is Amazon Robotics. Oh, yeah. FTA recently received a brief from Amazon Australia. What's that all about? I'm not an expert on robotics,
Okay.
not an expert on AI, but obviously all of this is the future going forward. Look, some time ago we looked at just e-commerce in general, and we could see it was going to be a growing thing. So one of our team members some time ago said, Paul, we really need to get into the e-commerce space, and we need to get these big players on board. And I go, the likes of Amazon and Alibaba and eBay, they're not going to get involved with us. Anyway, but just to prove that anything is possible if you give it a go, we pitched to them, and we're now running an e-commerce reference group for those three organisations, for Amazon, Alibaba and eBay.
Wow.
We're a platform there where we read out the competition law at every meeting, so there's no discussion about pricing or competition or the like. It's really just looking at common issues affecting those parties, with a particular focus on the cross-border, the border and biosecurity elements of their business.
Right.
But it's great to be able to work with them and just to see some of the initiatives that they're doing. I suppose Alibaba and eBay are different because they're really just a marketplace, but Amazon
Is its own logistics.
it's its own incredible organisation of its own.
So Amazon is probably our industry. When I say our industry, the traditional freight forwarding industry's biggest threat.
Yeah.
I view them as that, yeah.
And there's other threats, as well, besides what Amazon are doing. You've got, no one's sticking to their knitting these days. So, you're seeing more and more that the shipping lines are acquiring freight forwarders and getting involved in freight forwarding.
Yes.
And got airlines now and doing their own air freight. Even the stevedores are getting more and more into the landside logistics and not just loading and unloading ships. And it's all a threat. But, again, that's commerce. Yeah. As long as they're not taking any unfair commercial advantage, and again, we're very focused on that and working with the ACCC on that to make sure, we did see some circumstances during the pandemic where freight capacity was at a real premium, where some of the shipping lines were suggesting the only way you're going to importers, the only way you're going to get space on the ship is if you give us your customs clearance, your forwarding, your...
That's right. They want the whole box and dice.
That's not allowed. And we're working very closely with the ACCC to ensure that that is done fairly. If there's going to be vertical integration and they can deliver benefits, that's great, but it's got to be done in a legitimate way.
Yes.
So there are a whole lot of threats out there, but again, that's a part of our role as well, is to make sure it's within legal boundaries and to help. We're almost like a watchdog for the watchdog.
Well, I think, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
Because these companies, these massive behemoth of companies have so much power in their hands and so much cash due to the COVID years.
Yeah.
Like from everyday users like you and I, they're world great power. They're buying things left, right and center. They're growing this way, that way, every which direction. And for them to easily just, like you said, you see users for all, or we make the markets in such a way that it's no longer financial viable to use anything outside of umbrella. Yeah. It's so easy for them to do that. And it's kind of scary to think of that. So voices such as yourself is critical. It's critical to safeguard that space.
And it is. But again, freight forwarders are generally pretty smart as well. And they do have the advantage of being nimble. They're not locked in generally to one shipping line. They can move from line to line. And they do still offer that flexibility. And then normally have the expertise on the cross-border requirements, the local domestic. As you know, it's not an easy task. And, I quite often look at it and go, it's a miracle cargo still comes in and out of the country. And it's largely due to the professionalism of freight forwarding companies.
We've never had too much of a luxury not to carve out ingenious ways of survival. Right? Because as a freight forwarder, if you look at the entire supply chain, we're probably the most vulnerable party in it all, right? What keeps us relevant is our service. What keeps us relevant is our nimbleness, like you've mentioned, for us to pivot, right? Because we don't own the boats, we don't own the planes and what have you. And a lot of the, dealing with the truckers and going to the terminals, all of these are beyond our control. So in that environment, we've really had to carve out a successful relationship of how to deal with these parties, at the same time not let these parties dictate too much of what we do as an entity, because each and every one of these parties can easily swallow up what we do.
Yeah.
Because if you really think what we do is putting heads on it and giving that service.
Yeah.
Right. Any of these fixed asset party can do it. So shipping lines are trying, buying forwarders, right? Going to and buying airlines now and so forth. Having spoken to some of the individuals or groups of individuals in these, behemoth areas or what have you, or entities or threats, their drive is really, I fear, is going to a place where it's going to become rather bleak from anyone who's looking for service, in a traditional sense of service. All of these big companies are, in my personal opinion, are scaling up in such a way they want to commoditize everything. Make the entire process of moving shipment just like an arbitrary experience. There's no longer any type of relationship building. They don't want any of that. They want to really suck that out and be all online based. People go online, typing something, click, 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 price, move, go. Right? Really taking that human element out of it. And that's the freight forwarder.
Yeah.
So that's a threat, massive threat. And
it's a threat, but it's only a threat if it works. Again, I'm a bit older than you, and I'm a bit more old-fashioned with things, but I'm okay with, if I go to a website and I have to use, an online help or a bot or whatever it is, I'm okay with it as long as it's easy to use and it works.
Yes.
As soon as it's not easy to use or it doesn't work, I'm going, who can I ring? Where can I ring on this? Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, logistics is not straightforward. And you still do need the human element and the human skill to be able to navigate through, whether it's the whole cartage and transport operation, whether it's the cross-border, whether it's biosecurity. And like, biosecurity is a nightmare, but in some ways it's a blessing, because it is so difficult and complicated that you can't just automate it. It still is a requirement.
This is probably a good sort of segue into me wanting to discuss a subject matter with yourself and see how we can come together and collaborate on this particular subject. And that is on this, just as you were saying, I'm someone who uses tech, it doesn't work, I want to call someone and so forth. We as an entity have been getting a lot of calls from the elderly part of our community who, for one way or another, found themselves online and they're being scammed.
Yeah.
I have no idea how they find our numbers, and they're calling our numbers up and say, well, I was told to call you guys because, I paid money here and expecting a shipment, I need to track you through. And I was like, how did you guys even find us? And then I take the time to listen into these good folks' stories, and invariably they've been scammed one way or another, and they've just, somebody on, in the scamming world must have just gone online, gave our numbers, sort of passed them off as however that works. There's not enough attention being put on that area where we can, talk about, as an industry, help freight forwarders, because I know as a freight forwarder, we have been scammed, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of us out there. So maybe we can come together and collaborate and deep dive into it. Maybe do a session where we have a roundtable, share stories of scams that's going about, the ones that have scammed, to share their personal stories, and then share solutions or safeguard ourselves to avoid this, because it is going to become, every year becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. We try to reach out to the government bodies and so forth. When we've been scammed, they don't want to hear nothing about it. It's those two hard basket. So I think I see other industries are coming together as industries talking about it, and I think this is an area I think that's going to be very significant for us, because the language we're seeing being used by the scammers today, coming directly to us as a business, they clearly got some experience in the industry.
Look, again, it's a great idea, and at least we can share those experiences as these are coming to know. Look, the other issue is just systems getting hacked.
Yes.
And look, unfortunately, we experienced it ourselves at FTA going back probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a total shock.
Yes.
But we ended up engaging a guy who was absolutely brilliant to do a penetration test of our system.
Wow.
But it was actually scary, because what we thought was a pretty solid system, he just tore holes through it and had all our data within no time flat.
Wow.
So we're then since working with him, and we've got an arrangement in place now where he'll do these penetration tests for members, but they're not cheap. But then you ask anyone who's been hacked, they go, geez, I wish I paid for it. But what he's now offering, and we'll be promoting it again too, is on a success basis.
Yes. Right.
So he'll do a penetration test, but if he can't crack your system, he won't charge.
Right.
So really, it's an opportunity now for the industry
do share it if you feel like sharing this information. Now or in another session, please do so. Because I think it's valuable. Whoever views, I'm sure there's a lot of industry folks looking at this right now. They'll be highly very keen on it.
Well, the details are on our homepage, on the FTA, Freight and Trade Alliance homepage, so people can have a look at that.
And we'll put the links on the descriptions. One of the last things I want to cover with you is the most recent post, which I commented on your LinkedIn, which is this payment systems that you had a session with Ripple. Tell me about it. I mean, like, poor Zalai Ripple. I was like, how did these two come together?
It's a really good question. And all this blockchain stuff and all of it, I don't get it. I'll be the first to admit it. But I'm trying to understand. My 32-year-old son, who's a bit more savvy to all of this stuff, he put his hard-earned dollars in buying some shares in Ripple. So, and he doesn't part with his money easily. In fact, he'd rather buy these shares and pay the money he owes back mum and dad, which I wasn't really impressed about, but that's another story. But that sort of made me stand up and take a little bit of notice.
Right.
And again, I'm not an expert on it, but I understand. They approached us some time ago, but at the time they were battling some legal battle in the US.
Yes.
And our position to them was, look, come back to us once that's sorted out, because you only get one chance at a first impression. And if this court case doesn't go well for you, it wasn't going to go. So anyway, they got a good result in the US court case, and they approached us again. And look, we're going to have a bit more of a look at it. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on it, but we may look to promote their product. And again, it'll be buyer beware. We'll say to our members, look, here's this new technology. From what I can understand, it can generate real-time transfer of payments.
Yes.
And they seem to have a lot of checks and balances in place. At the briefing that I was at where I did that post, there was a lot of representatives from the major banks that were very interested in it. So it is a real thing.
That's right.
But how that translates to meaningful solutions for our members, we'll only understand that in a bit more time.
I think I've got a little bit more understanding of Ripple because I have been following the Ripple case since got into the dramas with the financial bodies in the US. That period of time for Ripple, it was when the whole world was still trying to grappling with the idea of what blockchain was and all that sort of stuff, and because you're really going outside of the banking system, right? And anything that goes out of the banking system, the governments don't like it, because they can't see it. But Ripple's difference compared to all the other blockchains is that other blockchains is a decentralized model, which means that no one party controls it, whereas Ripple is a centralized model. So they want regulation. They want to basically plug into the government system and use blockchain as a technology by way of payments getting transferred in an instant manner. When I saw you sort of talking to Ripple, I was like, oh, because I haven't followed their case lately, I didn't know whether they had a positive outcome or negative outcome, but the fact that you were talking to them, I thought they must have had a positive outcome. And then if their payment system are launching here in Australia or are offering as a legitimate commercial business offer, it's very interesting. It'd be very interesting for the likes of me as well, right? Because it will make cross-border payments and so forth a lot more efficient. It'd be very interesting to see what the fees they will charge. I'm sure you'll probably get some of those details. But do share it with us when you get that information. What's the next step with them?
Oh, look, really, the group came and presented down here at the waterfront here at Sydney Harbour, but they were all Singapore-based, and so they were doing a bit of a roadshow here to start getting their branding out. So we'll follow back with them, and I think we'll probably just do some information sessions. I'm not going to try and speak on their behalf, but let them engage direct with the members, and members can ask questions, and we'll see where that goes.
Well, again, venture into areas where you might normally not be very comfortable with, but good on you for going there.
Well, and again, it'll be with a whole lot of caveats. It'll be to say, look, here's a new solution,
Yeah.
but buyer beware.
So that's all I have to cover with yourself.
Lara, it's always great talking to you.
Yeah.
What I would like to do is thank you and your organisation for supporting the recent charity event that we put together.
Yes.
It was a fantastic, it was good fun.
It was good fun.
But importantly, collectively as an industry, we raised over $80,000 for the charities.
Fantastic.
So-
Is that a record?
Well, it is.
It is,
and look, we're hopeful of doing it bigger and better again next year, but really appreciated your sponsorship and support for that event.
We will continue to do so.
And maybe you can help us promote the next event and through your channel as well.
Happy to do that. Absolutely. Please utilize this platform. You know, on or off the camera, anything you need for us to do, even just for what you want to shoot, please feel free to come and use this space. We're here to support you. Again, not because anything else other than that you have been doing some great advocacy work for the industry. This is what we're higher on. This is what I'm higher on as an individual in this industry. And we need more people like you. And so, you know, again, very privileged and honoured to have you for our 1,000 subscriber episode.
Thanks again, Lara. Much appreciated.